teaching. I want to draw special attention today to the namesake of this lecture, so let me augment the program notes with some slides about Frieda Olga Wunderly. She was born in Lucerne, Switzerland, one of the oldest of a large family, and she is right there on the left-hand side, furthest to the left. She attended night school in Lucerne in her youth, learning English among other subjects. The family immigrated to Utah in 1912, where Wunderly pursued a 2-year business course at Brigham Young Academy. Actually, this picture was taken in Zurich, I think so. She taught at BYU from 1916 to 1924, where she also continued her studies and earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in 1919. Here she is with her mother and brother who served in World War I. So this was during the time that she was studying for her degree. An admirable polyglot, Wunderly taught both German, her first language, and French. Here you can see her signature on a passport application in 1922, which shows that she traveled during the summer to Great Britain, Italy, France, Switzerland, and Germany to continue her language studies. She also offered courses in business writing, including typewriting, shorthand, and dictation at Brigham Young University. After her marriage in 1924, and this is her marriage certificate, Wunderly raised 3 children, instilling in them her work ethic and commitment to education. An opera enthusiast, she attended every one of her children's plays and musical performances, but, according to family lore, never their sporting events. We believe the College of Humanities has carried on her legacy of superior teaching since her marriage 100 years ago, and are committed to ensuring that legacy continues here for the next century. I should mention that more information on her and other early women teachers at BYU can be found in a just opened exhibit space 5 floors above us in the east or west alcove of the 4th floor of this building. So if you get a chance, go to that alcove and take a look at some of the interesting female faculty who have served at BYU in the early part of the last century. We'll now have an invocation offered by Don Chapman from the Linguistics Department to formally begin this event.
Our Father in heaven, we're grateful to be here. We're grateful to be in this lecture today and to be here at BYU, and we're grateful for all the associations that affords us. We're grateful to be able to learn together and teach each other, and we're especially grateful for our associations with Brother Rollins and for his example and for his wisdom. We ask that you bless him now as he speaks to us, that he'll do so with confidence and feel good about what he has to share with us. We ask you to bless us all, that we'll learn from this and we'll profit from it. And we're grateful for thy love for us. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Don. The introduction for Professor Rollins will be offered by Grant Eckstein, a professor of linguistics and the college. And following Professor Eckstein's introduction, we'll hear the lecture.
I don't have any slides to introduce Jacob, Dr. Rollins, but you'll see him in the flesh, so I think that makes up for it. Jacob Rollins is an associate professor here in the linguistics department at BYU, and he's been a dedicated member of the faculty since September 2015, contributing significantly to the editing and publishing program. And Dr. Rollins earned his PhD in rhetoric and professional communications from Iowa State University in 2003, and prior to this, he completed his Master's of Public Administration and earned a Bachelor's of Arts in History, both at BYU. So he's a well-rounded scholar. And before transitioning to academia, Dr. Rollins also gained valuable experience in the publishing industry. He worked in the editing department of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Salt Lake City, and later at the Neil A. Maxwell Institute for Religious Scholarship at BYU. So when he speaks to students about editing, he has a lot of practical experience to draw on. Dr. Rollins' research interests span various aspects of applied rhetoric, language prescription, editing, professional communication, and the history of publishing. And his teaching interests align closely with his research focuses encompassing editing, the publishing business, the history of the book, professional communication, and the study of the English language. And in addition to his academic pursuits, Dr. Rawlins is actively involved in professional organizations, such as the Association for Business Communication, the National Communication Association, and the Rhetoric Society of America, and he also edits or co-edits in those fields as well. Dr. Rawlins' dedication to scholarly inquiry extends beyond his research into his teaching as well. And he and I serve on several research groups which have allowed me to observe his intellect, his collegiality, his humor, his convictions, and his love for students. He's able to guide projects and encourage students effortlessly. He also makes homemade ice cream for his students. You can understand why he's such a popular teacher. And on his Rate My Professor profile, in which he has a perfect score of awesome and 100% would take again, comments from students include, he actually cares about you and wants to teach you so you're ready for the real world, not just for a grade. Next, another comment, he takes into account the needs of all the students and is always flexible. And another explained, his classes aren't hard, but you learn a ton. I would die for this man. That's it. And in fact, 2 people mentioned dying for Dr. Rawlins. So I suppose that makes him a professor to die for. My hat's off to Ray. Dr. Rawlins is an outstanding leader, a compassionate teacher, an exceptional scholar, and an exquisite model for the Wunderly Lecture today. We're all lucky to hear from him now.
Thank you for that introduction, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for inviting me to speak. I especially want to thank those of you who have joined me at my special invitation, who represent some of the best teachers that I've had in my academic career, including all levels of my work. I'm also honored to speak at this lecture in honor of Professor Wunderly. I've enjoyed learning about her and her contributions to BYU. She transcended boundaries for her time, and her work provided some of my inspiration for my discussion of boundaries in pedagogy today. So for the few of you who have followed my career over the past few years, it should come as no surprise that I'm going to start in Wales. For the past 16 centuries or so, there's been an ongoing discussion of the relationship between the Welsh people and their neighbors to the east. At times over the centuries, this discussion has gotten a little bit more heated as the Welsh people and their Anglo-Saxon / Norman / English neighbors fight over the dividing lines. And different rulers have taken different approaches to this border, this boundary between the two peoples. In the late 700s, King Offa of Mercia built a dike, which you see the remains of here, Offa's dike, to separate Mercia and the Welsh kingdoms. Despite some disagreement about whether it was actually used as a defensive structure, most scholars agree that Offa's dike's primary purpose was to represent the boundary, to define what had been a moving boundary into a formally negotiated boundary between the two countries. Now, over the centuries, again, we don't know how much this was used as a defensive structure, but there is some tradition about that. And it actually still exists today. You can take a walking path along Offa's Dyke from South Wales to North Wales if you walk that far, which I clearly don't. But the tradition was, so a 19th century author, George Borrow, said that it was customary for the English to cut off the ears of every Welshman who was found to the east of the dike, and for the Welsh to hang every Englishman whom they found to the west of it. So it wasn't all peaceful there. This was the primary boundary structure between the Wales and the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms until the Normans arrived in 1066. Although William the Conqueror smashed his way through England and Wales, it was his descendant, this handsome guy, Edward I, who completed the conquest of Wales. The Norman approach to the Welsh border was to build a ring of stone castles. If you go to Wales, it's covered with castles. Most of those are Norman-era castles. Some of those were owned and controlled by the monarch, like this one at Carnarvon. Others were controlled by the Marcher lords, like this one at Chepstow, which is near Tintern Abbey. They were built and defended by these lords who were given extraordinary rights in return for subduing and subjecting the Welsh people. The Marcher, and in this case march means boundary or border, so the border lords provided a strong defense, but the castles themselves provided a visual representation of Norman dominance over the people of Wales. And just to give you an idea of how much borderland was necessary to maintain dominance, the brighter colors around the edge, those are all Marcher lands. The darker colors right on the coast are the pure Wales, is what it's called. So these hundreds of stone castles in Wales played key roles in Welsh uprisings and in the devastating War of the Roses. When the War of the Roses ended, Henry Tudor took over, and he was a Welshman by birth. He claimed the crown, and he and his son, Henry VIII, took a different approach to the Welsh border. And this was part of a larger effort to restructure the power dynamics on the island of Great Britain. So in 1535, Henry VIII signed this document. This is the first of the Laws in Wales Acts, which read in part, "Some rude and ignorant people have made distinction between the king's subjects of this realm and his subjects of Wales, whereby great discord, variance, debate, division, murmur, and sedition hath grown between his said subjects." And it goes on like that for a while. He then explains that the goal of this act in particular is to bring his said subjects of this his realm and of his said dominion of Wales to an amicable concord and unity. Now, so this sounds like a really good approach, a good motive at least, but his methods were a little bit more extreme. So the Laws in Wales Act, starting with this one and then the second one in 1542, stripped the Marcher lords of their power. They annexed Wales into the county structure of England, and they outlawed the Welsh language for official purposes. And as you can see from these maps, so this is before Henry VIII, and this is afterwards, Wales just disappears from the map. It's still there, but the borders are gone, and they're part of the counties of England. So these three different approaches to the English-Welsh boundary, define, defend, and dissolve, are often the same approaches we still take when we're navigating boundaries of all sorts today. The philosopher and rhetorician Kenneth Burke theorized that we spend much of our time in our discourse on building and defining our identities in relationship to other people. Part of that is determined by our alignment with others whose interests are joined with ours, or those we are persuaded to believe that their interests are joined with ours. George Chaney added that this process of identification places us within the matrix of the social order. In order to build our identities, however, we need to see the divisions. We need to see the boundaries. Burke writes, "Identification is affirmed with earnestness precisely because there is division. If men were not apart from one another, there would be no need for the rhetorician to proclaim their unity." When we look at boundaries of all sorts, our nature is to find ways to define those boundaries, to determine who is like us and who is not like us. This helps us determine our own identities, but it also creates what Wilson and Herndl term lines of demarcation and differentiation that serve as boundaries of division and exclusion in a rhetorical struggle to differentiate groups to contest the legitimacy of the other. When we look back at the history of the English-Welsh boundary, we see this division. The peoples on opposite sides of the border claim different heritages, speak different languages, have different legends and myths, and practice different versions of religion. When the boundary was a defined line or a defended border, those lines of demarcation were reinforced. They reinforced the different identities. When Henry VIII dissolved the border, the lines were blurred on the map, but the identities actually became entrenched because there was more rhetorical work being done defining who is Welsh, who is English, and who is not. So I'm going to add one more example of a boundary, and this one is at the center of my talk today. So this is the back fence in the house where I grew up. When my parents moved into this house in the late 1970s, it was in a brand new neighborhood, all new construction, empty yards, and new neighbors. And so all these new neighbors got together, bought a large load of cinder blocks, and built this fence together. It runs throughout the central part of the neighborhood as a dividing line between all of the properties. This fence was also a central part of the neighborhood community. So I remember my dad leaning against that fence there to talk to his neighbor about the corn that you see growing there. When new neighbors moved in behind us, we met them over the fence. And when we had parties or picnics or whatever, we climbed over the fence. And for the children and teenagers, the fence was much, much more. It was a highway connected to all the other houses that provided a shortcut to secret meetings with just a hint of danger. We also would hide secret messages in the various holes in the fence. Some of them may still be there. So this represents a fourth approach to boundary work, which is discourse, or creating an integrative exigence, where members of different communities find common ground and shared goals. The boundaries become a place of community building, and the work that we do on those boundaries becomes a struggle for understanding and integration rather than a contest, controversy, or demarcation. Universities are built on interconnected networks of boundaries that divide us into colleges, departments, disciplines, programs. In this talk, I'm going to briefly discuss 4 areas where faculty at BYU have the opportunity to engage in rhetorical boundary work, particularly in our interactions with students. First up, we're going to talk about boundaries around learning. And as I start on these next sections, just a couple of warnings. First, I'm going to share some personal stories, which may bring up the last remaining emotions that haven't been deadened by years of peer review. Second, I'm also going to reveal some things about my undergraduate career that may not be very flattering. So I'd like to remind you all that I am past my CFS review, and I'm safe for now. So I arrived at BYU as a very young, very naive, and fairly arrogant freshman in 1994. There were many things I should have known about attending college. I was not a first-generation college student. I was not even the first in my family to go to BYU. I was not the only one of my siblings at BYU that year. But there were a lot of things I didn't pay attention to. So a method of choosing classes that first year was to flip through the course catalog and find things that looked interesting, without paying attention to majors, programs, prerequisites. None of that mattered to me. So on the first day of fall semester, the class I was most excited about was on classical Greek literature, which was, I had loved reading Homer in high school, and I was excited to pursue that a little bit more in college. Imagine my distress when I walk into class the first day, and in introducing the syllabus, the professor says, "In this class, we'll be studying the classics in classical Greek." This was a problem for me because my Greek class didn't start for another hour after that. so I dropped the class on Homer. So, you would have think that I learned a lesson from that brief, humiliating retreat. But no. So here's my winter schedule for that freshman year. I have redacted my grades from that schedule. You may notice a conspicuous lack of proper preparation for these classes. None of them were in Greek, but some of them may as well have been. So it was a difficult year for me. Now, that's on the one hand. On the other hand, my ignoring boundaries here brought me into contact with some of the finest professors at BYU. So during that first year, I took advanced courses from Eugene England and Greg Clark, Suzanne Lundquist, and Craig Harleen. I compare my freshman experience with my daughter's, and she's here now. She has always had a different approach to her life, a different approach to college. When she was about 11, she laid out her plan through graduate school for me. Although I should be fair that those plans have evolved. They involve fewer horses now. Before she stepped on campus as a freshman this past fall, she had a semester-by-semester plan of all the courses she needs to take to graduate 2 majors and a minor in 4 years. So even with all of this careful preparation, in one of her meetings with an advisor, the advisor looked at her 4-year plan with all the classes laid out perfectly, pointed out a single class and asked, "Why are you taking this class? It doesn't do anything to fill requirements for your major." And I mean, I remember this because it was my class that she was taking. So a lot of things have changed at BYU since I was a freshman 30 years ago. We now have a detailed guidance, a system in place for every student. We have extraordinary advisors. We have software systems that prevent them from making too many mistakes. But as we've drawn boundaries around classes and programs and departments and colleges, I wonder sometimes if we built a system that discourages exploration for fear of crossing well-defined borders. So Grant mentioned that I am the coordinator for the editing and publishing program here, which means I get to hear all the suggestions and complaints from our students and from our alumni. The most common complaint that I hear is a question: why do we have to take all of these courses that don't have anything to do with editing? Okay? And I know that some of you have heard those because I hear that in reports from our alumni that come back to me. They say, "Have you heard this complaint?" I say, "Yes, I have." So let me show you what our major looks like in my map. We all have one of these for our majors. We have a core of required courses. In this case, we have core linguistics courses, we have a core of editing courses, and then we have the university requirements and a bunch of electives to help students build their own program, build their own experience. But let me show you what a different visualization of our major from what I hear some of our students describe. So this is much simpler. For some of our students, their view is so limited by the boundaries between the different requirements that they are unable to see the possibilities for connections. So I based this visualization a little bit on a bento box, as you can see, or as those of us who are less sophisticated call it a Lunchable. Lunchables came out in my early teens, and so I was not in their core demographic at that time. But my kids loved them. They were special treats for my kids. As a parent, I thought they were ridiculous, I thought they were expensive, but for kids they were magic, right? They're interactive, they're fun, the little containers keep the pieces separate until you're ready to eat them, and then you can combine them any way you want. The magic of Lunchables is not in the separation of ingredients, it's in the personalized combination of those ingredients. And the same is true of our programs at BYU. We provide boundaries and divisions to guide our students so they don't have to stumble through the course catalog like I did. We provide visual representations and detailed guides to help them know what to take to graduate in each major and minor. If we are thinking about these guides as boundaries, the faculty act as architects of these boundaries. We carefully design our programs to draw on the best combination of university core courses, required courses, and elective courses to prepare our students to enter our disciplines. And we provide plenty of opportunities for students to personalize their educational experience by finding connections among the different courses. The problem that I see most of all is a problem of vision. Students who are navigating the labyrinth of our programs may only see the walls on their sides and a limited path ahead of them. As we teach our students and meet with them to advise them in their programs, we need to help them lift their eyes above the limiting boundaries of their direct path to see the patterns, connections, and beauty of the full program. We need to encourage them to create their own combinations so they can experience the magic of learning. To help students gain a new vision of our programs, we often need to draw back the curtain on the processes involved in building the boundaries. Wilson and Herndl wrote, "When participants can see the concrete text from which knowledge emerges and the distance from their own immediate concerns, understanding and integration rather than demarcation become possible." So when our students ask us questions, even brief answers about the process and about the greater vision shows them that this is not just random, it's not determined by a computer, it's determined by faculty who care about them and who have provided guides for them. Where we can, we should also acknowledge the broad vision, the limitations, and the restrictions that guide our design of courses and programs. Helping students see the patterns of the boundaries and the opportunities for learning will give them guidance and freedom to build their own educational experience. My second section is on boundaries between disciplines. So when I interviewed at BYU in early 2014, it was a little bit of a surreal experience for me. I remember I finished my interview at the ASB and I was walking across campus. It was during class, so nobody else was on the quad there. And I started laughing out loud because, as Grant noted, my degrees are in history, public administration, and rhetoric. And I was currently teaching at the University of Louisville's College of Business. And here I was at BYU, interviewing for a faculty job in linguistics, teaching editing and publishing. None of this made any sense to me. Some of my colleagues evidently agreed with that sentiment. So, fun things I heard in my interview. And this is not designed to call out my colleagues, but there's a point here. So, are you a colonizer from rhetoric? How is editing linguistics? What can you add to linguistics? Editing is not an academic discipline. Editing does not belong at BYU. It belongs at a community college. Editing as a discipline is intellectually bankrupt, which is my personal favorite. I come back to that one frequently. So as I said, I'm not airing my grievances here or calling out my colleagues. Rather, these statements show that they were engaging in a very important process of boundary work. As I was coming in as an outsider with degrees that didn't match, they needed to figure out where to put me and how they were going to evaluate me and how they were going to relate to me in research and teaching and all the other work that we do as faculty. So they were seeking to understand, define, and defend the boundaries that exist between us. Now, I knew about this situation a bit coming in. So during quieter moments, I asked some of the faculty that I knew for advice on how to navigate this situation in linguistics. One advised me, keep your head down. Focus on editing and don't get involved in the broader problems in the department. Another told me, frame everything you do in linguistic terms. Call what you want in private, but as far as the department goes, you are doing linguistics. There's not a lot of practical difference between rhetoric and linguistics anyway, which both my colleagues from rhetoric and linguistics are, I see your dander getting up there. So that I wasn't satisfied with that advice. That night in the hotel, I called my dissertation advisor. He had become a friend, a mentor, and we'd co-authored work together. And so I told him about the experience and the challenges that I was facing. And he gave me very different advice. He said, and it was a really big if for him, if you take this job, take it on your terms, go in with your head held high and do what you do. Be true to your training and be confident in who you are. So the next day, as I gave my research presentation, which I'd been revising in the hotel, I took my advisor's advice and addressed the elephant in the room directly. This is an actual slide from my presentation, Why Rhetoric? I am not a linguist. I am a rhetorician with professional training in editing and publishing and an interdisciplinary background. I spoke about what my training in rhetoric could add to the editing program at BYU, but also about how I saw editing fitting into the larger department. Since that time, my approach to the boundaries in linguistics has been to learn to articulate where the boundaries lie between the programs, but also to articulate the opportunities for overlapping interests, collaboration, and ultimately building unity. In their article about rhetorical boundary work, Wilson and Hurdle, quoting Gallison, argue for the creation of trading zones, which create a fluidity and openness at the margins of discourse and paradigms that allow for local interchanges in practice, if not in theory. In academia, trading zones are places of connection and collaboration between disciplines. These trading zones, however, require both parties to have something to exchange. Each party has to have something that they know has value and be able to understand the value of the other party's contribution. In our own interdisciplinary work, the trading zones we set up need to be places of confidence and curiosity, where we recognize that interactions across boundaries are opportunities for complementing strengths and compensating for weaknesses. Our students may need more to push. Well, we have a system of education that exposes students to different disciplines. Most have been taught from a young age that there's power in focused specialization. My children were encouraged to pick a career path, starting in junior high, and to take classes closely focused on that career path. As a result of this career guidance, students often become very good at specialization, and with that specific identification with a career. How many of you have heard your students say something like, I'm an English major, I can't do math. Or, I'm an engineering student, I can't write. Too often our students see other disciplines as distractions from their main path toward graduation and a career, rather than opportunities for connection and growth. As faculty at BYU, we have the responsibility to teach our students how to be confident in their disciplines. This is a challenge sometimes for my editing and publishing students, because there isn't a large portion of the publishing industry that publishes about publishing. every one of my students will need to go out and work in a different field. They've gotten jobs working in publishing in literature, science, engineering, business, a number of other areas. I had one student hired at a steel mill in Ohio doing their internal editing. 2 were working for the airlines doing their editing. And so we do have to expose them to different disciplines and teach them to appreciate those and to act with confidence. We try to do this throughout our classes, and in our counseling we do exercises and assignments that draw on texts from other disciplines. Still, many of them feel inadequate or insecure when they're asked to edit complex documents from other fields. The message that we give them over and over is that as editors, they're collaborators with their authors. They don't need to be experts in the author's field. That is the author's job. But they do need to be confident in their training as editors. They need to appreciate the value of their own work, whether they're applying for jobs, doing freelance contracts, or in the day-to-day work of making suggestions and corrections on manuscripts. On the other hand, we also have the responsibility to teach our students to be curious about other disciplines, to recognize the value of different kinds of knowledge and seek ways to collaborate with others on equal footing. This may be more of a challenge in some disciplines than it is in editing and publishing. Some disciplines, the confidence is high, but curiosity is fairly low outside the narrow field. And so you have to do more to push them into experiencing other disciplines and just appreciating other kinds of knowledge and other individuals. So in the first class of my master's program, Jeff Thompson, who's joined us today, taught us a process for forming teams and working collaboratively, which we then use not just for his class, but throughout the 3-year program. I now teach a condensed version of that process to most of my classes. It helps as students recognize their strengths and weaknesses and teaches them to work with other students in a way that uses the best qualities that each student has to offer. In this case, the student teamwork in our classes is a carefully constructed trading zone that models successful interdisciplinary work. It teaches them curiosity about other fields and practical skills of combining their expertise with the talents of other students. So in our own research, in our classrooms, we have the opportunity to teach our students interdisciplinary work by approaching the boundaries of our disciplines with a combination of confidence and curiosity. The trading zones we create for ourselves and our students can then be powerful places of collaboration and growth. Part 3, boundaries before careers. Shortly after my mission, after that disastrous freshman year, I went on a mission and I came back and I took a class that I absolutely loved. I was inspired by the content and awed by the professor. Toward the end of the semester, I gathered my courage and I went to his office. And my question for him was fairly direct. How do I do what you do? He looked at me for what felt like a really long time and then answered, "You're about 10 years too late to get started." He went on to explain how students pursuing graduate work in his area have been studying the subject since elementary school in the most exclusive schools in the country. And that I, as a product of public school, was probably too far behind to compete in graduate programs. I remember him being kind, but very clear, this path is closed to you. So several years later, I did take another path. I wasn't that stubborn. Several years later, I had finished my bachelor's and master's degrees and was working professionally when Mel Thorne called me, and Sandra's here with us today. He asked me to teach an editing course as an adjunct, and I loved it. So about halfway through the semester, I went to Mel's office and asked him the same question. How do I do what you do? And Mel spent over an hour with me for that first meeting. It was the first of several meetings, talking me through the challenges of graduate school and the dim prospects of the job market at the time. He also encouraged me to talk to other faculty about their programs and experiences. He was encouraging to me, but he also did not obscure the pitfalls and perils I would face along the way. His message was also kind and clear. The way is difficult, but it is open. We have many opportunities to give career advice to our students. As faculty, we stand at the boundary between higher education and their careers. And for most of our students, this boundary is challenging, terrifying, and cloaked in a daunting layer of darkness. We can choose to stand as guards at the gateway through the boundary, turning away or discouraging students, or we can stand as guides who can show the way and help students avoid the perils of the path. It may surprise you to hear that after those stories that I believe we must act as both guides and as guards. Of course, we want to be encouraging as we prepare the next generation. But not every one of our students is cut out for every field that they want to go into. Interest or even passion about a subject does not equal talent or preparation. When students come to us for career advice, we need to have the courage to be honest with them, both about the challenges of the career field as a whole and about their chances and opportunities in that field. We don't help our students by making promises of careers that their abilities can't deliver. To be honest with our students, we have to know our students. We have to understand the career opportunities, the range of career opportunities, and also rely on a healthy mix of intuition and inspiration. Once again, our main job at the Boundary is to increase our students' vision. We need to help them see the depth and breadth of the career field and to envision their own place within that field. Often this means expanding their vision beyond what they want to see. In the editing and publishing program, I'm going to throw out a made-up number here, but it's pretty close. 83.7% of our students enter the program with the belief that they will be able to get a job editing young adult fiction immediately after graduation. So in our advisement, I see uncomfortable smiles from my students in there. In our advisement meetings, in our classes, and in our mentoring opportunities, we work to expand that vision, to help our students see that there's a vast world of editing jobs, most of which are not young adult or fiction. We also try to help them see other opportunities like graduate school in a variety of fields and careers in other areas of communication. Increasing student vision of careers should also involve experiential learning through internships, jobs, guest speakers, and design workplace simulations. In my version of our capstone project class, students produced this Stowaway magazine, which is, here's a couple of our recent issues, where they write, edit, design, and produce the whole thing. In this class, I've worked to design it as close to the boundary between career and education as possible. So students are organized into staff, they build their own schedule, they hold each other accountable, they are responsible for setting up communication challenges and for solving problems, they set up policies, they set up ice cream days, and I deliver, so. But my role is different too. I start out the semester as their professor, and I give them that normal role as professor. But there's a point a few weeks into the semester where I warn the students, I am now taking off my kind and supportive professor hat and replacing it with my editor-in-chief hat. That means I will not always feed you compliment sandwiches, and I may tell you that something is not good enough or even that I hate it. And I will tell you to keep revising until it is good enough. My purpose in this warning is to set them up for the feedback that I'm going to give them. But it's also to shift their view from the classroom and its accompanying grades to the final quality of the product. This class is more focused on their careers in that it rewards meeting publication standards rather than rewarding points for effort. In all this, faculty stand at the gateway of the boundary between education and careers. When we expand student vision through carefully planned activities and experiences, along with honest advice, we can point the way through the gate and smooth their passage through the rough transition. Finally, boundaries and discipleship. In the near decade since I came to BYU as a member of faculty, I've seen an increased focus on living and working as disciples of Jesus Christ. The central mission of BYU is not new, of course. Brigham Young included it, faithful discipleship, as part of his vision of education. And that vision has been repeated and expanded by the leaders of the church and the presidents of BYU since 1876. But in the past few years, under President Worthen and now under President Rees, that focus on connecting our scholarship with our discipleship has increased. In President Rees's inaugural address, he said, "The faculty and staff who foster this double heritage must be bilingual. They must speak with authority about their disciplines in the language of scholarship, and they must speak with power about their Christian discipleship in the language of faith." In my time at BYU, we've had many discussions about this double heritage and the boundary between scholarship and discipleship. We've had devotionals, faculty meetings, employee trainings, all of which have focused on the principles and practices of navigating this boundary. In these discussions, I've seen all four approaches to boundary work. Some faculty seek to carefully define the line between their scholarship and their faith. Others see their work as central to defending the faith. Still others see no boundary line. Their faith and their scholarship overlap completely. For most, the boundaries between discipleship and scholarship are a constant discourse. A negotiation as our fields of study expand and grow and we gain new knowledge, new relationships with scholars outside of BYU, and new challenges and questions to address in terms of our faith. In all of this discussion, we've been taught to model our discipleship for our students. In practical terms, this may mean talking about our church callings during class or beginning class with a prayer. It also may mean taking time in classes to discuss connections between our subject and the scriptures. For me, however, the most powerful demonstration of discipleship is in how we love our students. So, one last time, go back with me to my freshman year. My choices in the types of classes I took and my lack of preparation for college-level work meant that I had not done very well. Actually, let me rephrase that. I had done very not well. On the last day of finals, I went back to my apartment at Heritage Halls and was joking with my roommate who was in a similarly bad situation. We knew our grades would not be good for the semester. We were not sure if they were the level of bad that would prevent us from coming back to BYU. Although I was joking, I was in a rough place. Disappointment, self-doubt, and discouragement darkened my thoughts. It was at this point that the apartment phone rang. I answered and I heard this deep voice on the other end. "Jacob, this is Craig Harling. You've missed several assignments and I'm wondering if you'd like to turn them in. I'm here until 5 if you'd like to drop by." So this phone call was a small thing. It was a small thing for Dr. Arlene, who's also here with us today. But it was a turning point in my life. It didn't move the needle much on my grades. There's only so much you can salvage a semester in an afternoon. But the small act of merciful outreach told me that there was one professor on campus who cared how I did and how I was. When I started teaching, I returned to that phone call many times. When I'm frustrated with students who disappear from class for weeks at a time, or who don't submit assignments, or who do only the bare minimum, I remind myself of the mercy that I received. And I think of this scripture from the Savior. "Shouldst not thou also have compassion on thy fellow servant, even as though I had pity on thee?" And so I reach out. Almost always when I reach out, I find a student in need of comfort, physically, mentally, or emotionally. And the small act of my reaching out to them is something that they can hold on to. And in most cases, our interaction does not make that big of a difference in their grade. There are many choices that students make that I can't fix. But grades are the least important thing at that moment. The merciful outreach from a professor is what they need because it's a reflection of the mercy that I've received from my many professors and ultimately a reflection of the love of Christ. As faculty, we stand in a visible position of trust for our students. While we are doing our own rhetorical boundary work on our path to scholarship and discipleship, our students see us as examples of our disciplines. They should also see us as examples of Christ-like love and faith. When they walk away from BYU, no matter which direction they go, our students should be able to look back to us to see us with our hands outstretched in faith, mercy, and love. The system of higher education, as I mentioned before, is built around complex systems of boundaries. As faculty, we already spend a lot of our time navigating through the divisions and connections within the BYU community. We're already doing significant boundary work because it comes naturally with our profession. But I believe we can be more intentional about it and be aware of the work we are modeling for our students. In the 4 examples of boundary work I've discussed today, faculty play just different roles in each of those. In the first, in our majors and departments, we are the architects of the boundaries that guide students through their degrees. We need to help them lift their view to see the patterns and the connections that are possible as they devote themselves to learning. In the second, as we build training zones, we can encourage them to build training zones where they can act with confidence in their own skills and curiosity about others to collaborate in any kind of collaborative work. As they are approaching the terminal boundary of their formal education, we stand at the gateway to guard the path, guide their way, and lift their eyes so that they can see the broad range of possibilities ahead of them. And on the boundary of scholarship and faith, we can treat our students with love and mercy in acts of Christ-like discipleship. Through it all, we can treat the boundaries that surround us not as barriers, but as opportunities to build an amicable concord and unity in the BYU community. Thank you.